This story begins back on May 1st, 1776 in Bavaria, or what is now known as modern-day Germany. See, it was here that Adam Weishaupt had started a group called the Perfectibilists, which he would then change the name to the Illuminati. The Weishaupt's parents were Orthodox Jews who had become Roman Catholic converts, but they orphaned him at a young age, and his uncle had sent him to Jesuit schools. Weishaupt grew less and less interested in these teachings and began studying the occult. He read every ancient text he could get his hands on, and through this became increasingly obsessed with the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now, it was after studying the Pyramid of Giza that Weishaupt then began to organize his own secret group, the Illuminati, to, quote, transform the human race. Now, the Illuminati had 5 goals. One was the abolition of monarchies and all-ordered governments. 2 was the abolition of private property and inheritances. They've done this today with property tax. I mean, you don't own that land, you pay rent on that land. If you decide to stop paying your property taxes, what happens? They evict you. And of course, they've all but abolished inheritances with death tax. And goal 3, the abolition of patriotism and nationalism. That's an easy one nowadays. They don't even hide that anymore. They straight up denounce patriotism and nationalism as being racist. Number 4, the abolition of family life and the institution of marriage, and the establishment of a communal education of children. Now, we've already done this to 2 working parent households that wreaked havoc on the family life. Marriage is at an all-time low. Every show for the past 50 years has pushed infidelity and promiscuity on people. I mean, look at soap operas, for instance. For 7 generations, housewives have stayed home and watched shows focused on adultery. That's the one constant of soap operas. I mean, the whole other storylines come and go, but there's always drama involving characters being unfaithful to each other. If you don't think that's wreaked havoc on the collective conscience of our society for the better half of a century, then you're blind. Just because something's normalized doesn't mean it isn't bad. And the 5th goal, abolition of religion. So these goals are what we today would call socialism. Not only private property because it belongs to the state, your inheritance goes to the tax, you're encouraged to think on a globalist scale rather than a nationalistic scale, and you're most likely atheist. So basically, modern socialism. Now, out of this Illuminati, many other secret societies had spawned, such as the German Union, who had monopolized the book market in Germany so effectively that the majority of books that they didn't distribute were forced to go out of print, giving them complete control over the flow of information in Germany. Another group was the Rosicrucians, who even moved their headquarters to Pennsylvania. One prominent member was none other than Benjamin Franklin. Another secret society, which was started in Yale in 1832 by President Taft's father, Alphonso Taft, was called the Skull and Bones. The Skull and Bones German counterpart was the Thule Society, known as the German Brotherhood of Death Society. Hitler joined the society famously in 1919, becoming an adept under the leadership of Dietrich Eckart. Later, the Thule Society selected Hitler to be their leader of the New World Order. As Eckart revealed on his deathbed, saying, quote, follow Hitler, he will dance, but it is I who have called the tune. I have initiated him into the secret doctrine, opened his centers in vision, and giving him the means to communicate with the powers. But now I'm getting ahead of myself. If we go back to this National Geographic article on Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati, it reveals that one of the Illuminati's prominent members was Mayer Amschel Bauer. The surname Bauer goes all the way back to medieval times, and one of the most famous alchemists, Richard Bauer. It was said that he was the only alchemist to successfully turn lead into gold. Of course, many historians link the medieval alchemist to the occult and satanic black magic, a perfect fit for Weishaupt's satanic-driven cult, the Illuminati. Now, Mayer Amschel Bauer was a well-off coin trader in Frankfurt. In front of his house hung a sign with the family symbol, which was a red hexagram. The hexagram, also known as the Seal of Solomon, the Magen David, or the Star of David, is very occultic. It's used today as the symbol of Israel, but is not Jewish. Hexagram was used in the ancient mystery religions. It was a symbol of Moloch, Ashtoreth, and others. In fact, the hexagram was used to represent Saturn. The 6-pointed star is considered the equivalent of the Oriental yin and yang symbol, which is the Luciferian concept of balancing good and evil. Now, Saturn worshippers worship the black cube. When a cube is drawn out, it looks like a hexagon, hence the hexagonal image. This is why you can find many cubes all over, such as this one from Apple, or this one in Santa Ana, this one in New York, Denmark, Australia, and even in Mecca. The god Saturn was depicted as a cruel god in ancient Rome, and in Greece as Kronos, the god of time. Traditional representations of the Grim Reaper come from Saturn, who held a sickle. Saturn is the sixth planet from the Sun. Saturday is named after Saturn as the sixth day of the week, and NASA has recently released these images of Saturn, revealing that the storm at its pole is in the form of a six-sided hexagon. The symbol appears to have been used by King Solomon when he was apostatized, and when therefore is called the Seal of Solomon. The Bauer's use of the hexagram as their family sign points to their involvement in Jewish Kabbalism. In fact, the six-pointed star was so significant to them that Mayer Amschel Bauer decided to adopt it as his new name, Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Rothschild meaning red shield. It was believed this was done to identify his family with occultism and the likes of Saturn or Ashereth, who the Esther is named after. Now, Mayer was sent to be a rabbi when he was 10 in 1753. A year and a half later, his parents died. Now, Mayer was brilliant and was encouraged by relatives to continue his studies, but coin trading was his love. He left school when he was 13, was sent to Hanover to be an apprentice at the Illuminati Oppenheimer Bank. Mayer went on to build a hugely prosperous banking business in Germany. Now, wanting to expand the family business across Europe, the eldest Rothschild, Amschel, remained in Frankfurt, Germany, while each of the other four sons were sent to different European cities to establish central banking branches. Karl Rothschild was sent to Naples, Italy. James Rothschild was sent to Paris, France. Nathan Rothschild was sent to London, and is the great-great-great-great-grandfather of Jacob Rothschild, and finally, trained in finance and with years of experience in 1820, Solomon Rothschild was sent to Austria. In Vienna, Solomon von Rothschild established S.M. von Rothschild. The business financed Austria's first steel railway, plus funding various government undertakings where large amounts of capital had to be raised. He made connections amongst the country's aristocracy and its political elite through Prince Clemens Metternich and Friedrich von Goetz. And according to an investigation ordered by Austrian Chancellor Dollfuss on Adolf Hitler, it was uncovered that at the time of conception, Hitler's grandmother, Maria Anna Schicklgruber, was living in Vienna and employed as a servant in the home of Baron Solomon Rothschild. Upon discovery of her pregnancy, she was sent out back home where her son Alois was born. Alois Schicklgruber was Adolf Hitler's father. He did not change his name to Hitler until 40 years of age. Now, the Gestapo apparently came in possession of this file, and many feel it was the reason that Hitler went to Austria first, to wipe the slate clean. Now, it seemed, however, that Hitler already knew this and was only upset at his discovery. So when he was orphaned in 1907, it's known that right afterwards, Hitler traveled to Vienna, and then there's no record of any of the next 10 months. And many believe this is when he was reuniting with his grandfather's family, the Rothschilds. It is known, however, that in 1919, he joined the secret Thule Society. And as we went over, the inner core of the Thule Society are all Satanists who practice black magic, which has come as no surprise, being that Hitler's focus on the occult is well documented. It's even said that he had sent Nazis to India in search of ancient Hindu texts which contained diagrams on Vimana and anti-gravity formulas found from the texts in the secret society of the 9 unknown men formed by Emperor Ashoka shortly after 226 BC. And the anti-gravity formula reads as follows. It says if you pressurize mercury plasma at 250,000 atmospheres at a temperature of 150 degrees Kelvin and accelerate that to 50,000 RPM, you can create anti-gravity. So what else was happening around this time? In America, you had just had the election of 1912, which was overrun with socialism and secret societies. Now remember, the main goal of Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati were exactly the same as socialism. You had Hitler, who was a national socialist and a member of the Thule secret society, which is the Skull and Bones, which connects back to the Illuminati, all of which is steeped in the occult. The most famous Illuminati member being Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who started the central bank conglomerate which currently controls the world, whose original name was Bauer, coincidentally the same name as the famous occultist alchemist Richard Bauer. And this should be starting to paint a picture that the world is controlled by these secret societies. They keep us enslaved by debt monetary system put in place by Mayor Rothschild's central banks, and they run our countries by continually putting their own members up for election. They then use their control of the media to have us fight over which one of their members should be elected. You see, it's always been about socialism or slight variations. And this is where the roots of communism reach back to. Although nowadays we perceive it as the other way around, originally in the 1800s, communism was a revamping of socialism due to its lack of popularity. And backed by these secret societies, with Frederick Engels and Karl Marx's new book, The Communist Manifesto, the seeds of this new socialism began to spread. Which brings us to present day, where communism and socialism have reached a new level of popularity, with Bernie and Cortez and kids coming out of college preaching communism in an alarming clip, and this was done on purpose. Kids going to college nationalists who love their country and coming out communism is the culmination of a slow infiltration of our society, namely our education system. Here's a former KGB agent breaking it down back in 1985.
Only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So the next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized. This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in the United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere.
So, you see that there has been a push to implement communism in this country since its inception, with one of the greatest victories being the election of 1912. Now, from the bottom up, first you have Eugene Debs, who placed fourth, who's an out-and-out socialist, received almost 1 million votes. Second, you had the incumbent President Taft, whose father, Alfonso Taft, started the Skull and Bones, another secret society bent on running the world. As the runner-up, you had Roosevelt, who ran as a progressive, which is also a leftist or socialist platform. And at the top, the winner, running on the Democrat ticket, Woodrow Wilson. Now, this is when the United States began its first legitimate shift towards communism. This is when the secret societies took full control of the U.S. See, Woodrow Wilson's top advisor was Edward Mandell House, who wrote in a book that very same year that he was working to implement socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. Edward Mandell House is also the founder of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is currently the main branch of the deep state that runs things. But true to his advisor's wishes, Woodrow Wilson implemented two major planks of the Communist Manifesto, by making the Federal Reserve our central bank and by making the income tax permanent with the 16th Amendment. And here's Representative Larry McDonald trying to expose this back in May of 1983. He died just a few months after this interview, when his Korean Airlines flight was accidentally shot down by Soviet interceptors. Here's what he had to say.
Mr. McDonald, I'm not a conspirator. I think even Buchanan would vouch for that.
Well, you are a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Robert Wells. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Is that a conspiracy?
Well, you've certainly. Well,
let me just tell you what Newsweek says this. The John Birch Society considers communism only one arm of a master conspiracy in which socialist American insiders are plotting to establish world government. Now, it also says, and here's Director John McManus, that's your public relations director, saying that former Secretary of State Alexander Haig and CIA Director William Casey are two of these master conspirators who are plotting to establish world government. Now, what do you say? That kind of silly, asinine statement is what makes people laugh. That's the John Birch Society.
Well, Tom, I'm sure being a long-standing member of the Rockefeller apparatus and as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations of long-standing, you're fully aware that there is an elitist core in this country that has seen value in subsidizing communism or protecting communism.
It has?
Sure.
You're accusing me of subsidizing communism?
No, I'm saying
because I happen to belong to a
there is an elite core.
Study group?
No, wait a minute. There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society.
Well, I'm not one of them.
Well,
Trilateral Commission.
the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations.
State
Here's a group-
Department, I suppose?
Well, let's face it, they've dominated the State Department for 40 years, and pretty much openly
All right,
so.
but what are they trying to do?
Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who
With
are
the
they?
belief, the elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the
Is
Council
the
on Foreign
International
Relations.
Monetary Fund part of this?
Well, I would say the International Monetary Fund has certainly been set up for the purpose of facilitating that transfer of sovereignty and transfer of wealth on the road.
All right, we
to
elected
something.
Mr. Conservative.
Let me just finish the point, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of unanswered questions. That you are looking at a group that has worked to bring about a dissolution of national sovereignty on the road to world government. And certainly you're familiar with local professor Carroll Quigley, who's been part of your club, in which he admitted all this. And he said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, the only thing I disagree is that we've worked to keep it a secret. And you see Arthur Schlesinger Jr. writing way back in 1947, says, yes, this is the hidden policy of America. But we can't tell the American public because they're too unsophisticated to see the value.
What is the
Right.
instrumentality of world government?
Statement
What is
like,
the
of all the
instrumentality through
things
which...
to say about Arthur Schlesinger, that's the silliest statement I ever heard. He never made anything like
Well,
that.
let me suggest that you read the May-June issue of the Partisan Review of 1947, Tom, and you can read it for yourself. It's called
Arthur
the Schlesinger
Schlesinger said there was a
Manifesto.
conspiracy, a conspiracy
Oh,
to
he didn't
promote
use the word.
communism.
Oh, he didn't use the word conspiracy.
I
He
think
said the
Tom-
objective
Oh,
was
what
to
kind of
bring about...
nonsense is
Well, let me finish. I'll tell you. He said that the objective, the secret policy, which we can't tell the American public because they're not sophisticated enough to see the value, is that through a steady result of erosion of new deals, we bring the American society steadily to the left,
All right.
and through a sound concept of benign containment, we merge into the vital center of the socialist left. Those are his words, not mine.
Well, read more about conspiracies, and that's why I'm interested in what
Well,
Mr.
I'll tell you what
McDonald
you ought to
says
do is go back and look at your founder, Edward Mandell House, because he wrote the book Philip Drew, Administrator, and in
Colonel
this, Colonel House said that what he envisioned for the world was a world government along socialist lines as envisioned by Karl Marx. Now, that's your leader, now, Tom, so you got to go back to the beginning.
Well, his
and see
leader
what
was
the vote-
Woodrow Wilson. Do you think he was a communist?
No, I think Woodrow Wilson was his follower. I think Edward Mandell House dominated Wilson, not the other way around.
And so Edward Mandell House, that was we ought to make that clear. He was
Colonel House.
President Wilson's
Alter
advisor.
ego, that's correct.
Yeah. So he is the real villain from which all these conspiracies.
No. He is a major figure, Tom, but there has been, unfortunately, in the West, an element. There are good members in the Council on Foreign Relations, dedicated, patriotic people. You've had Sproul Brayton, who was a member of the Council of the Birch Society,
Bill Buckley's
and
another.
Council on Foreign Relations. You've got some dedicated people, but the driving forces have very clearly been willing to collaborate, subsidize, work the technology transfer for what they feel is some type of an accommodation and merger. And I submit this would be a disaster for the American Republic.
And that's why nothing's changed in so long. We only have the illusion of choice. Obama versus Romney were both members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Obama and McCain, both Council on Foreign Relations. Bush and Kerry, both members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Bush and Gore, even back to Bush Sr. and Clinton. Bush Sr., whose father, Prescott Bush, dug up Geronimo's grave as a member of the Skull and Bones Secret Society. Or Clinton, whose wife was a protege of known socialist organizer Saul Alinsky. Bill Cooper breaks it down perfectly here.
All of them are New World people. Tsongas, in his book, even everything that he's written touts the New World Order. All of it, right for Tsongas's literature. You're going to see New World Order, New World Order, New World Order, New World Order. Clinton, governor of Arkansas, was selected in 1991 by the Bilderberg Group in Baden-Baden, Germany, to be the new president of the United States. Remember what happened to Gary Hart? What did he do? He went out on a boat with a woman who wasn't his wife, and he was destroyed. Look at Clinton. What's happened to him? Nothing. The press is on his side. They're helping the guy. You know why? Because he was chosen by the people who own the press to be the next president of the United States. Now, I don't know if he will be or not. That's up to the American people. But if they get their way, he will be. Bush is one of the most heinous criminals that's ever walked on the face of the earth. Bush is the man who's been a CIA agent since his college days. He's a member of the Skull and Bones, the Russell Trust. He was initiated in it. in a casket with a ribbon tied around his genitalia, which symbolizes that he's a priest in the temple of Isis. A pagan, this guy. This man is a member of the mystery schools.
Well, he has the outward appearance of a good Christian, church-going Christian, no?
They do whatever they have to be approved by the people, but in secret, they're not at all. This is a man who practices pagan religious rituals, magic. Doesn't matter what you think of all these things. I'm just telling you, this is what he does in secret.
Mm-hmm.
He is the man who, when he was chief executive officer, when he was president of the offshore division of Zapata Oil, organized and began the first large-scale drug smuggling operations into this country. George Bush is the one responsible for the drugs on the streets. And the war against drugs is not a war against drugs, it's a war against the Bill of Rights. We've already lost the Fourth Amendment in this war.
That's true.
And we're going to lose everything else.
So from Bush Sr., the former head of the CIA and member of the Skull and Bones, back to President Taft, whose father created the Skull and Bones, or every election being two members of the CFR, going back to Wilson's top advisor, Edward Mandell House, who created the CFR, this country has been almost exclusively run by secret societies. Now I say almost because there have been a few that have broke through. JFK tried to warn everyone in this speech that he had given right before he was assassinated. Listen closely to what he has to say.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
They'll show you that speech in school. Now, Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy, was a Knight of Malta, another secret society. And the feeling on the street after the stock market crash of 1929 was that it was done on purpose, with Joseph Kennedy being one of the three main short sellers to cause it. Now, just months before this collapse, another Knight of Malta, Benito Mussolini, former leader of the Italian Socialist Party before he left and created his black shirts and took over Italy, had given the Vatican 1,750,000,000 lira. Now, Pope Pius XI took this money and invested the majority of this vast sum into America shortly after the crash, but basically buying America, buying most of the news, and more importantly, buying the entire narrative. The stock market crash additionally put all the smaller banks out of business, basically giving complete supremacy to the Federal Reserve. Now, Joseph Kennedy had originally wanted his oldest son, Joseph Kennedy Jr., to become president. When he was killed, he shifted his ambitions to getting John elected. John, however, refused to submit temporal power to the Pope, and as you saw earlier, even tried to expose all this. The rest is, unfortunately, history. But it's not just the United States that these secret societies have been promoting communism, it's everywhere. That's why you always hear about countries talking about democracy. Oh, we're all democracies, and this is democracy, democracy, democracy. Democracy is code for communism. The United States is not a democracy.
The American people are living in a matrix. They don't understand the truth of how things are working in this country, And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. The very fact is that if you ask 100 people on the street, what kind of government is America supposed to be? 99% of them will tell you a democracy. America is supposed to be a democracy. But that's a lie. That's an illusion. The word democracy is not written into the Constitution at one time. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. The Founding Fathers hated the idea of a democracy. They thought it was the worst form of government there is. And I agree with them. Because in a democracy, 51% of the people control 49% of the people. If you're part of the 49%, you're not free. America was founded as a constitutional republic. And in that constitutional republic that we have, 99% of the people can't take away the rights of 1%. You have your rights because you were born with them. You have God-given human rights that nobody can take away from you. The government, the majority, no matter who they are, I can't take away your rights. And that's what our founding fathers gave us. But the psychological operations that they do to us, they make us believe that we're a democracy and that majority rules, you see? And they want you to believe that. Because then they tell you this poll says this many want this and this many want that and this many want this, and it doesn't have anything to do with anything.
Well, Hitler was elected.
Hitler was elected. Hitler did everything legally.
And in a constitutional republic, a minority is protected against a majority. Wasn't it Benjamin Franklin, to paraphrase, that said democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner?
Exactly. And then he also said, in a republic, the sheep would have a gun.
That is why they hate the Constitution and have tried to take it out to this day. But how do you really take over a place like America or Europe? It's one thing to control the government and monetary system. That only goes so far. How do you control hundreds of millions of proud people who are full of free will and pride? You create the greatest false flag in human history and then hold them to it forever. The plan began in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. This was a public statement issued by the British government announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The letter was sent to Lord Lionel Rothschild from the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour. So now people think that the creation of Israel was a reaction to the events of World War II, as opposed to have been in writing by the Crown all the way back to 1917. Much like how people think the Patriot Act was in reaction to the mass murders of New York and Washington, when in fact that Patriot Act was first introduced in 1999. So step one was the Treaty of Versailles. Amongst the people who helped draft this in 1919 were the aforementioned Arthur Balfour and Edward Mandell House, Woodrow Wilson's top advisor. The man who started the CFR and worked closely with Wilson to help create the League of Nations, which we now know is the more updated version of the United Nations, and this was the catalyst for World War II. The plan began by financially crippling Germany. With the unattainable demands of the Treaty of Versailles, they knew Germany's economy would collapse. Now they turned to Solomon Rothschild's illegitimate grandson and recruited him to infiltrate the German Workers' Party, which he did, eventually changing their name to the National Socialists. Now, with Germany falling deeper into financial ruin by the day, Hitler was able to play on this and rise to the top of the National Socialist Party. The financial collapse was blamed on the Jews, and Hitler used this to come into power. Now, once in power, he slowly began introducing laws against Jewish citizens, eventually throwing them into work camps. He formed book burnings, taking complete control over the flow of information, just like the German Union had done a century earlier, and that's when Hitler then began his quest to bring all of Europe under a one unified socialist nation state, essentially the exact modern European Union. Now, secret recording of Hitler showed that he wanted to disarm his citizens, much like modern socialists in America try today. He stated, quote, "The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subjugated races to possess arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subjugated races to carry arms have prepared their own downfall by doing so." This is what we see time and time again with communist or socialist takeovers. A major financial collapse to get them in, then disarmament, then mass murder. It happened with Mao Zedong in China, happened with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, happened with Castro in Cuba. Only did it happen in Germany? We know even though Hitler had expressed his desire to disarm the public, he only went as far as to have them register their arms. And there are glaring discrepancies with the number of Holocaust victims. For starters, if you look at the 1933 Jewish World Almanac, the Jewish population of Europe is stated as 9.5 million Jews. So now when you compare this to most modern reports of 6 and now 8 million casualties, you should have around 1 to 3 million left. But if you go to the 1948 Almanac, it states that the Jewish population of Europe is 9.4 million Jews. Now that's only a difference of 100,000, which is actually in line with the only other official death toll paper, the Red Cross's official death toll from the 70s of 271,000 total prisoner deaths of everything. Now, even though the 271,000 is all the total prisoners and was gypsies and all these other people in there, it's reasonable to think that a good 100,000 of them could have been Jews. And that's how sick these people are. They would kill 100,000 of their own freaking people just to pull this off. I mean, that is absolutely atrocious. But you know, that's the thing. Those aren't their people. They were just regular Jewish citizens living in Europe. These are old families in occult-driven secret societies. The Rothschilds aren't Jewish. They say they are in public, but then they go back to the occult alchemists. And then the Luciferian Illuminati, started by Adam Weishaupt, who was schooled by the Jesuits, who run the Vatican, who run the Knights of Malta, and on and on and on. You see, this is a small group of secret societies who are all intertwined with each other. A small network who use fear and chaos to enslave the population under socialism. Everything is connected. For example, here's Pierre Trudeau and his wife Margaret down in Cuba the year before Justin was born. Here's Margaret returning with baby Justin right after he was born. Here's Justin next to a young Fidel. Any questions? They use the same bloodlines over and over and the same formulas over and over. Zane's surprised that the German Antifa flag from Nazi Germany is exactly the same as the modern Antifa flag. They do the same things over and over. They turned white Europe into a battleground for decades with World War I and II. Then they turned Asia into a battleground for decades with Vietnam and Korea. They've now turned the Middle East into a battleground for decades with Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, all funded and agitated by these secret organizations. Hitler had radicalized his people into destroying most of their fellow white European countries, and then they were bombed into ruins by the Allied forces for it. The Middle East was radicalized by secret society plans through the 70s and 80s into creating terror worldwide, and then were bombed into ruins by the Allied forces for it. This was Berlin before the war, 1936. Look how beautiful and thriving it was. Some of these clips even look like they could be from not that long ago, and this was 83 years ago. And here's after the war. Imagine how many years cities like Berlin, Paris, Warsaw, and so many more were set back after World War II. And just for a reference point, here's Iran in the 70s. After the war was over and served its purpose, many of the Nazi higher-ups were brought over to America through Project Paperclip. The head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Müller, who looks an awful lot like Robert Mueller, was rumored to have either escaped to Central America or was brought over to America and given a new identity. The creator and head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, who looks an awful lot like Rod Rosenstein, was reported to have been in custody under a different name, finally admitting his true identity and then taking a cyanide pill. Head physician Joseph Mengele, who looks an awful lot like Emmanuel Macron, was rumored to have escaped to South America, and Adolf Hitler, who was originally reported dead by the Soviets, was recently revealed to have also escaped to South America by a newly unsealed CIA document. Within the first release of the JFK files, there was this document that states that Adolf Hitler had left Colombia for Argentina in 1955. And also contained this picture of Adolf in Colombia in 1954, coincidentally the birth year of Germany's current chancellor, Angela Merkel, who looks an awful lot like Hitler. Now when the smoke cleared, white Europe was in ruin, the Rothschilds had their own country and the ultimate weapon. What are you, a Nazi? And that's the main goal of a false flag. It's a propaganda piece to be used as an excuse to attack someone. It's a permission slip. Look at what these Muslims did to these buildings. We gotta get them. We found this passport, so we know for sure it was the Muslims. I mean, look right here. It's Muhammad Atta. I found it right on the ground. I know when that plane hit, it made a football stadium-sized fireball, but this totally survived. The cockpit and the pilot, they were incinerated to dust. But this passport, this is super real. And that's why mostly white countries are nearly a thing of the past. You have all black countries, you have all Spanish countries, you have all Asian countries, while white countries are being flooded with non-whites daily. But don't say anything. What are you, a Nazi? Don't forget what the Nazis did. We got to keep you white nationalists down. We can't let another Holocaust happen. Every other race can talk for hours about how much they love their people, but not you whites. You're evil. They have used this horrible event of their own making to silence people for over 70 years. And that's what they do. They create war because out of chaos comes order. That's why they have done it time and time again. The USS Maine, which was supposedly blown up by the Spanish occupying Cuba, they found later that all of their communications back to Spain said they were desperately trying to avoid a war, meaning the US most likely blew up the Maine themselves. And what happened after that? J.P. Morgan set up the banks all over the island of Cuba and took over the sugarcane operations. And that's just curiously around the time that everything began containing more and more and more and more and more sugar until where we are now. What are the odds? Another example is the Gulf of Tonkin. That was the catalyst for the Vietnam War. This was later to be revealed to be entirely made up. The Gulf of Tonkin, which had been reported on by Jim Morrison's dad. In fact, strangely enough, most of the bands to spring up seemingly overnight out of Laurel Canyon had parents who were military intelligence. At the same exact time that we know now that CIA was spreading LSD around and even doing mind control experiments with it. Just like they've been linked to the crack epidemic of the 80s. Just like they've been linked to the current heroin epidemic. But now, going back to World War II, let's take a look at this clip from the Donohue show where these two men shared their research into the gas chambers.
My studies are based on my own examination into the physical evidence. The gas chambers, the buildings claimed to be the gas chambers, still exist at two of the camps in Poland. You can go there, you can conduct forensic tests, or you can go there and just look for yourself. But most importantly, the Zyklon B gas that is said to have been used leaves blue stains and traces on the walls. These are the delousing chambers at Birkenau, at the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. They are loaded with blue staining that indicates Zyklon B gas usage. Here I am in the inside of the delousing chamber. The blue staining is clear. The traces are measurable even 50 years after the fact. But now we come to the inside of a gas chamber, a supposedly murderous gas chamber at the Mauthausen camp in Austria. There is no blue staining on the walls, no Zyklon B traces in the walls. They have been measured. There is no Zyklon B residue. 50 years after the fact, it exists at the delousing chambers. It does not exist in the supposedly homicidal gas chambers. Here we see the door to the Mauthausen gas chamber. It does not lock. It doesn't lock. The latches can be opened from the inside or the outside, as I am showing right here. You cannot lock somebody into this room. You cannot lock somebody out of this room. This is physical evidence. It has nothing to do with what I'm assuming or what I'm guessing about. Then I show a door to one of the gas chambers at the Majdanek camp in Poland. Same thing. The door should be coming up. Here we go. The door latches only from the inside. Here I am, I'm standing inside the gas chamber, and I'm showing the latches from the inside. Now, this door opens into the chamber. If you're going to pack 1,000 people in a room and kill them, you can't have a door that then opens into the room, because they will be piled up against the door where they died. I want to put the issue in some perspective, especially for the audience. When the war was over in 1945, it was claimed that there were 22 camps that had gas chambers in them. 22. By the 1950s, 16 of those camps had been officially revised by the Americans, the Israelis, the British, the Soviets, and now it was only claimed that 6 camps in Poland had gas chambers. In other words, what happened was the camps that were in Germany and Austria were able to be investigated by Americans, freely investigated by historians, but the camps in Poland were not made available to Western research.
Now that story goes a lot more in line with the official Red Cross death toll of 271,000 and the comparison of the 1933 and 1948 Almanac. So now we have this event which has been frozen in time, polarized, and weaponized against all people of white European descent. What do they say? Anytime a white right-winger breathes a word against anything, whatever the current narrative they're pushing, they call us racist Nazis, which is absolutely absurd, and that's what scares them the most. The fact that we don't separate ourselves by skin color. See, patriots have no skin color. We're united by our values, not by what we look like. We realize that skin color is a social construct which has been used by the powers to be to divide us, and we will no longer let the manipulations of a small group of people pit us against each other. So, in summation, pertaining to World War II, if you trace the bloodline of the man who facilitated this horrific event, which killed 25 million soldiers and nearly 300,000 civilians, it takes you back to Adam Weishoff's Illuminati, whose most prominent member was Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who put his son Solomon Rothschild in Vienna, whom Australian Chancellor Dollfuss had found out after an investigation had gotten his servant girl Maria Schicklgruber pregnant, who then gave birth to Alois Schicklgruber, who then had a son Adolf Hitler, whose first act of war was to go into Austria and kill Chancellor Dollfuss. Then Hitler, aka the worst white supremacist of all time, teamed up with the Middle East and Japan to destroy half of white Europe. Yeah, well, he's a real white supremacist. In turn, also getting Germany destroyed, which spawned the not-so-spontaneous creation of Israel, promised to the Rothschilds 2 years before the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the document which essentially caused World War II, and once it was over, many Nazis were snuck over to the Americas with the help of the American faction of the Thule Society, the Skull and Bones, by people like George Sheriff Sr., better known to us as Prescott Bush, and then, once in America, the former Nazi scientists continued their work on mind control, known as the MK Naomi and MK Ultra programs. They began fluoridizing the water with the help of a campaign by Edward Bernays, who wrote the book Propaganda, which was studied by Goebbels and used as his handbook. And in Europe, the countries were all brought together in a unified socialist nation-state anyway, with one of the most prominent leaders being someone who also is notorious for siding with Muslims to help facilitate the downfall of white Europe, and who has the same jowls, nose, eyes, and ears of the last leader to bring ruin to the German people. Where we go one, we go all.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
not at all. It was actually probably the happiest year of my life, that year of German occupation. For me, it was a very positive experience. It's a strange thing. You have a belief in yourself, your belief in your father. It's a very happy-making, exhilarating experience.